It's been a bit of a struggle for the Montreal Canadiens lately, but help may be on the way. Laura Saba of Locked On Canadiens is here to talk about that and all things Habs next on the Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the co-host of Locked On Canadiens, Laura Saba. And Laura, it wasn't the easiest weekend for the Canadiens and their fans. What happened this weekend or what didn't happen this weekend, maybe I should ask?
Essentially, yes. So those of you who know our show will know that when the officiating is bad, we will call it out. And I think against the New York Rangers, it wasn't just bad; it was egregious, right? So the Canadiens lost 2 games this weekend in regulation. They lost one against the Rangers on Saturday and one against Boston on Sunday. And the Rangers one was the one where, if you haven't been following the Canadiens this season, they've had a tough season, right? We've come to expect poor play, getting hemmed in their defensive zone, not being able to get anything going offensively. The team is, it's a rebuilding team. It's a very young team. They play immaturely. If they get scored on first, they can't really recover. And so it was really, really disheartening to see an effort against the New York Rangers where we know that they have been slumping. They are in disarray. Their last, I would say, maybe 10 to 15 games have really called into question whether they deserve to be in the playoffs, let alone near the top of the standings. And they were supposed to be a contender this year. So the Montreal Canadiens, as we've been asking them to do all season, exhibited killer instinct. They really saw a team that was suffering and slumping, and they decided that they were going to capitalize on that opportunity. However, the officiating had other plans, and it started with non-calls against egregious, trips and things like that, to then having the Canadiens bear the brunt of some roughing and fighting, etc., that the Rangers instigated. And not only did that happen, they spent an inordinate amount of time in that scrum trying to decide what to do, and at the end of it decided that the New York Rangers deserved a power play. But that was not even the end of it. Towards the end of the game, there was a very blatant non-call that cost the Canadiens an opportunity to go into overtime. And I think that that was really, in a nutshell. So to see a team rebuild their effort, to see a team put in an effort that we have not seen very many times this season. I could count maybe 1 or 2 games that we've seen so far, and they've played about 25 games so far. To see them put that effort and then not be rewarded, but not only that, have it snatched away from them was very disheartening. And if that's not enough, it's a 3 p.m. game against the New York Rangers, a 1 p.m. game against the New York Rangers. They have to follow that up with a back-to-back at 3 p.m. In Boston. And it was Boston's Centennial game. So, you can't really fault the schedule makers for the fact that Boston's Centennial game was going to be on Sunday, right? It had to be. You can't celebrate a centennial 2 months later. And you also cannot play any other team against the Boston Bruins for their centennial game than the Montreal Canadiens. There's way too much history there, right? So that's not really, it's an unfortunate piece of scheduling. I would have loved to have not seen the Canadiens play on the Saturday. But then on the second night of a back-to-back, or the second afternoon of a back-to-back, they came in to Boston and they played okay. They did not play as well as they played against the Rangers. But in the Boston game, goaltending really sunk them because I do believe that it was a winnable game. So it's a tough weekend for Canadiens fans. It's a tough weekend for the Habs, but there might be some good news on the way.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. Patrik Laine, close to returning. When do you think he'll be back, and what kind of an impact do you think he'll have on this young team?
So he traveled with the team. The team had a 3-game road trip. So they went to Columbus, and they went to New York, then they went to Boston, and he traveled with the team. But we were told that it was unlikely he would play. I think it was more traveling so that he would be with them for practices and et cetera, et cetera. So there is a small chance that he's going to play on Tuesday night against your Islanders, Gil. We are all officially on Patrik watch. It is on, it's any minute now at this point. I do think that it's more likely we'll see him later this week, but I don't think that we're going to wait longer than this week. And I would love to see him against the New York Islanders, but at the time that we're recording this, there's no news. And I do think it'll be a game day decision because they might announce it on Monday, but I think it's very, very unlikely. But he's pretty close to returning. He's been practicing he's been practicing with contact with the team, and his recovery has gone much faster than we expected. We thought we would see him around Christmas. Instead, we're seeing him just after American Thanksgiving. So it's definitely positive. And the impact that he's going to have on the young team is we have to measure our expectations, or manage our expectations, I should say. He is coming back from a very, very lengthy recovery period, during which there was one major setback, right? He was ready to come back, fully ready, and then he got injured in the preseason. So he spent a lot of time not playing NHL games. So it is going to be a little bit of a growing pains, a learning period, an adjustment period. I think adjustment period is the best way to say it. But I think the positive energy that he's going to inject into this team, coupled with the fact that there will now be an additional scoring threat on the team, is going to really inspire them. I think it's going to give them a better energy. You can't really do anything about the fact that this roster is just so young and so immature, and that maybe 50 to 70% of these players won't be here 2 years from now. But with Patrik Laine, I think who's going to be happiest? The centers, the Nick Suzuki, who's probably going to play again with him. Christian Dvorak, who might get a chance with him. Kirby Dach might get a chance with him. But I think everyone is just going to be so happy to see him. And he brings such a subtle, humorous energy. He's so funny, and they love him in the locker room. He's loved being around this team. The team has loved having him around. But I think you're going to see a new energy to this team.
You talked a little bit about the immaturity of this team, and we know they're in a rebuild, as you alluded to. How does the coaching staff speed up that maturing process?
So I think the biggest thing with Martin St. Louis is he's focused a lot on the little things, right? So the players are getting better at little things. I think it's really important to point out too that last season their penalty kill was hopeless. And this season it's actually quite good. It's quite impressive, right? So even though they do get hemmed in the defensive zone and they aren't able to get the puck up the ice or out of their own zone, I think that is really something that is a major improvement over last year's team. And I think the fact that Martin St. Louis tries to do these incremental small adjustments to people's game makes us very impatient, because you see that, maybe this individual player is not doing this bad habit anymore, but you're seeing them lose games, and you're seeing them lose games badly. And so I think the biggest thing is they need to figure out a way to develop killer instinct in these players, because you're not going to improve them defensively overnight. It's going to take a lot of those incremental improvements, but at least teaching them to capitalize on opportunities while you then try to help their transition game, try to help their defensive game, try to help them, remember to carry the puck into the ice instead of dumping or drop passing it, right? All these little bad habits, they're going to take a long time to fix, but if you can at least instill some killer instinct in this team, you're going to be able to see them be in games longer and like play 60 minutes.
Obviously something that would go a long way toward improving the team. Laurel, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
So the podcast is called Locked On Canadiens, and you can find it anywhere you get this podcast, right? YouTube, all the audio podcast apps. You can find us. We've actually migrated over to Blue Sky. You can find us at Locked On Canadiens on Blue Sky. You can also find us at Locked On Canadiens on pretty much everywhere else. We're on Instagram. We're on TikTok. Our Gmail address is Locked On Canadiens. You'll find me at The Active Stick, and you'll find my wonderful co-host at Maybe It's Ian. Check us out. We love to rant about the officiating. And in fact, our Monday episode is just that.
All right, Laura, thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live, play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. And hockey fans, use your knowledge of the game of hockey and your favorite team to place exciting bets on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League.